Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah?
I can,
Yeah.
so.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. All right, here we go. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today. Welcome to What It Takes to Be a Leader from an Ethnic Minority. This is the second event in this year's What It Takes series, featuring Westminster alumni speaking to current students and recent graduates. My name is Sarah Hafiz. I want to welcome you all today. I'm an academic engagement librarian here at the University of Westminster. Now, before I introduce our speaker, just a few little bits of housekeeping. So this talk is being recorded. It will be edited and made available on YouTube when it's ready. We will send you the link. Your cameras and microphones are automatically turned off, and the group chat is there for you to ask your questions to our speaker, Rishi. We'll collate all your questions during the talk and we'll put them to Rishi afterwards. The recording of this event, which ends up on YouTube, won't involve any of your usernames or pick up on any of the chat. So feel free to ask. So I am absolutely delighted to introduce our alumni speaker for today's talk, Rishi Chopra, who will be sharing his insights on what it takes to be a leader from an ethnic minority. A few little things about Rishi. Rishi graduated from University of Westminster in 2003 with a BSc in biochemistry. He's worked at many of the major pharmaceutical companies, including Roche, Janssen, and GlaxoSmithKline. He's currently at Biogen, where he is Senior Director, Head of International Pharmacovigilance. In this talk, Rishi will offer his insights and advice on leadership as someone from an ethnic minority. Rishi is driven by this belief that companies are most prosperous and successful when they embrace true diversity. And inspiring leaders are those that help cultivate and nurture diverse teams. Rishi also believes that your skills as a leader are constantly being developed and you never stop learning, which is why he enjoys what he does every day. I would also say, as a librarian, you do never stop learning. Rishi will do his talk first, and then I'll put your questions to him. Thank you so much, and over to you, Rishi.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks a lot. I will briefly introduce myself in addition to what Sarah's already mentioned. If we can switch to the slides, that would be great. So while we're doing that, just to kind of introduce myself. So Rishi Chopra, graduated in 2003. And, it's my pleasure to have this talk with you guys today on this topic. And, it's been a while since I've left Westminster and further education. So it's a great opportunity for me to reflect on my experiences to date. And, just hoping that I can share something with you that might be of benefit, because I can appreciate upon reflection what it was like to be in university and thinking what would be the next step and having aspirations of getting somewhere, but not necessarily knowing what would lay ahead. So hopefully there's some nuggets of information that I can share with you, and maybe that will be useful to you. So if we just go to the next slide. So just a quick disclaimer, and I always have to put this in whenever I present, is that any information or any opinions described in this presentation are solely my own, and they don't necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any organization that I've worked for in the past, or Biogen, which is the organization that I work for now. So that's just a very brief disclaimer. Next slide, please. So I've already done the introduction, but at some point you'll have all of these slides after the event, and my LinkedIn profile is here, so you could always reach out to me through LinkedIn or connect with me, and I'll talk about LinkedIn and the power of LinkedIn in my presentation, but that's a mechanism of reaching me. If you wanted to have a quick chat on anything else, I always welcome that. Next slide, please. So talking points, I'm just going to cover my background, and not just my professional background, but my personal background, my career journey, the difference between managing and leading. Sometimes they go hand in hand, but they are separate. You can be a leader without managing individuals. So I'll talk about those concepts. Networking, building relationships, and the value of mentors, good mentors. Workplace diversity, personal branding, and what I regard as my anchors. Throughout my professional experience, I've had an anchor, and I'll tell you more about that too. Next slide, please. So, I have to admit, when we came up with the title with Westminster as part of the What It Takes series, it was a difficult one for me to reflect on, because it's built up of two parts. It's sharing my experience of being a leader, and then adding the context that I come from an ethnic minority background, and and I have to kind of reflect on, well, how has one had the influence on the other? And so it's been, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's a really reflective opportunity for me, which is very beneficial for me, because you have to take a deeper look at certain experiences that you've had in your life, personal, and the experiences that I've had in my professional life, in order to come to some sort of conclusion, which I will share with you. Next slide. So really, like I said at the beginning, the aim of this talk is really just to give you a perspective. I think I've got an interesting background, if I do say so myself, in terms of my pathway to where I am today. And I only say that because of the folks and my peers around me in industry, and I feel like I have a different background to many. I also share some similarities in terms of perspectives and experiences with some of the folks that I've met, regardless of what their background is in terms of ethnicity or any other type of background. So, my advice to you all is that, whilst my aim of the aim of this talk is to give you some information, give you an insight, some nuggets of advice and recommendations, this is just one perspective. I highly recommend that you read up more, and there'll be some references in the slides that you can follow up on, and use that as a way of looking further into other related information that's out there on the web. But also hearing from other leaders, other individuals that you come across, and that's a large part of networking, which again I'll cover. So just one perspective that I hope to share with you today. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to cover, first of all, my background, so a little bit about me, just so you know the context of where I come from, essentially. So, what I count as my foundation, I think, in terms of who I am and how that has had an influence on my career, and you hear about that throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So, as you can probably tell from my name, I am of Indian descent. Both of my parents are from India. I was born in the UK, and I've grown up in Hounslow Central. That's probably the nicest picture that you'll have of Hounslow right now. But it was a fantastic place to live growing up. I'd lived there since I was 8 years old, and before that in Greenford. So if those are not familiar where Hounslow is, it's in the west of London. It's growing up, when we talk about the concept of ethnic minority and diversity, it was a place where the ethnic minority was almost the majority in that area that I grew up. Melting pot of cultures at the same time, so there were other cultures that you grew up with, but it was predominantly of an Asian community there. So I think Hounslow has changed now. For good, absolutely, and it's changed because there is even more diversity in terms of the community that's there. But that has a big influence in terms of my background and my outlook, not only on life, but also my professional career. So again, that will show up throughout this presentation. And you know, the other part, the most important part for me is my family. So I have an 18-month-old son. I have a dog and my wife. That's not our silhouette, but it's representative of my family. My family has been very important to me, of course. And again, it's a massive influence about how I have shaped my career, the choices that I've made in my professional life. And, you know, something that everybody will have to grapple with at one point or another is work-life balance. So that's really, really important. Once upon a time, you know, to reach the highest levels in an organization, there was some compromise, and there's always some level of compromise and sacrifice in terms of your own time, of course. But for me, that has always been integral to the choices that I make in terms of the influence that it has on my family. So just to share that. And I put this in small image in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm a big Arsenal supporter. It would probably be a bigger icon if we were a more successful team right now, but nevertheless, I'm a massive Arsenal supporter, and that's me. Next slide, please. So just to give you, you know, a background in terms of my education. So first and foremost, I mean, I should have said at the beginning, the intention of this whole presentation is not just to be relevant to those that are of an ethnic minority. It's hopefully I'm sharing something that's going to be useful for everybody, regardless of your background. But I'm just hoping to relate to those folks as well that may feel as if whilst you're in academia, you know, whilst you're in academia, you know, just is there some sort of insight that you can have as to what it takes to make a career? And just to give you a strapline from my perspective, that I feel sometimes as if I have made it to where I am today. I feel that anybody can, and I'll tell you why. But in terms of my educational background, what you see here, study this meme of the act of texting, eating, and watching TV with an open textbook nearby as a definition of study. That was pretty much me throughout my secondary school. At least I can't really remember what I was like in primary school, but in secondary school, and essentially conventional methods of assessment and you know, during education never really suited me very well. I think I had other skills, and I had lots of other soft skills that really showed up later on that have been a benefit for me, and you know, some of that I will emphasize. But essentially, education was not really my strongest point. The other thing that I would say, however, just to balance that might sound very weird, because in terms of my background, whilst I did a BSc at Westminster, I went on to do a master's in pharmaceutical science and management, and then I also did a diploma, a postgraduate diploma, whilst I was working, sponsored by a company. So it's kind of deceptive. It sounds as if because I've got those postgraduate qualifications as well as my undergraduate, as if I am an academic, but I do not feel that the definition of being an academic fits me. However, what I will say, and I can say this now in retrospect, Westminster was a fantastic place to go to university, and I'm sure you all agree as students there. For me, again, that when we talk about diversity, it was a very diverse university, even at that time in 2000 to 2003. So exceptionally diverse, you know, and I felt that, again, building the relationships that I did with Westminster students. I should also mention I met my wife at university, so Westminster's had a massive influence on my life, but also long-lasting friends and colleagues, I would say, as well. So Westminster's been an excellent, was an excellent period in my life. And my advice to you is that no matter what stage you are in your studies at Westminster, make the most of it, both from the standpoint of whether it's the social aspect, whether it's making lifelong friends and colleagues, but also from the aspect of the academic side. I wish I did do better at Westminster. I still came out with a 2.2, but I wish I did do better, and I did wish I applied myself a lot better at Westminster. So that's one reflection that I share with you right now is, whilst you're in academia, make the most of it. It's a short, relatively short period of your life in the context of everything else that is to come. So do make the most of it. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share now a little bit about my career journey. So a lot of people think that when you say you love your job, it's the same thing as you love your career. Those aren't the same things. I can be honest with you that, and I will share what my journey has been, that whilst I love my career, and a career is something that you build over time. A career is not something that you have with just one job or one placement, and you are constantly building your career. So I've not finished my career, therefore by definition I'm still building it. But have I always loved my job? I don't always love my job even now on a daily basis. Do I love my job in general? For sure I do now. Have there been jobs that I've had in the past that I've always loved? For sure I have not. And I would say, well, that's the beauty of building a career. And, you know, that there are going to be lessons that you learn in terms of the selections that you make, in the jobs that you take on. And sometimes you'll make the right decision, sometimes you'll not make the right decision, but there are always learning opportunities. So differentiating how you love your career is different to how you define whether you love your job. And sometimes when you do not love your job, that can be a defining moment for you in terms of changing your direction so that you do love your career and your overall professional your professional direction. So again, that's an important definition, distinction to make between the two. Next slide, please. So in terms of my own career journey, so like I said, after Westminster, I did a master's. So doing a biochemistry bachelor's, at that point, the only one thing that I knew that I was not suited to working in the lab. So for me, I wasn't really clear what I would do other than that. I had a family member that was working in the pharmaceutical industry at that time, but you know, that was not much more valuable in terms of knowledge, in terms of directing me as to where I would go. So my feeling was that I would do a master's, just to kind of give me, number one, a little bit more time, but number two, give me an additional qualification that would probably help me decide where I wanted to go in my career, or how I wanted to start my career. I tried one master's, which didn't work out well for me. It was just far too difficult for me. It was medical genetics and immunology, and that's a very difficult subject. Kudos to all of those that are studying those subjects. So I decided to do pharmaceutical science and management, a much more generalized master's, but the idea of that master's was to give insight across the full breadth of the pharmaceutical industry, which as a starting point I knew was the angle for me to take. So entry into industry after completing that master's was essentially an entry-level role at a very well-known company, and that was essentially data entry into systems. So the job that I do today is all about monitoring the safety of medicinal products, pharmaceutical products. So that relies on the collection of medical data, medical related data, in order to assess it. So it's essentially just entering the data into systems. But, you know, that was the first, when you look at it as an inflection point on your own career, for me, well, that was a moment of success for me, because it was making one of the most difficult transitions that you can make, which is going from academia to your very first job in whichever industry that you choose. That is one of the most important steps you're going to make, because it's opening up a brand new world to you, right? So entry into industry started for me in that way. And over the next 3 years in that company, I learned the job. I learned about the industry as a whole, generally. And there were opportunities that came up, and it required me to develop new skills along the way. And I chose to develop to a certain point in that organization. And then understanding the industry more, I wanted to see a different part of it. In order to do that at the time, development meant moving
Hi, Rishi. Sorry, I think you've muted yourself. Um,
Can you hear me now?
yeah, perfect. It was only for a couple of seconds.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll start. So in terms of entry into industry, and then I decided to move to a different organization to take up a different development opportunity. So for me, that was important. You see, because for me, one of the guiding principles in my career has been I've chosen not to necessarily wait for an opportunity to come up within an organization. If I have felt that a development opportunity has been right for me, that's when I've chosen to make a move, whether it's within another department of the same organization or moving to a different organization. And that approach, there'll be different approaches that suit different people. Some folks will prefer to stay within an organization. Now, the pros of that is that you're building up an expertise, you're building a profile within a single company, and that for your development is very good, but familiarity for the company is also a positive. Whereas if you move to a different organization, you are essentially starting your profile again, especially in the early stages of a career where you haven't certainly built up an external network. So it's a consideration for all as to which approach suits you. I mean, my advice is be a touch organic. Just do what you feel is natural for you, but what feeds your motivation and what feeds your interest. I had then spent another 3 years at that second organization and again moved on because I wanted to manage people, which I'll touch upon later in the presentation. And from there, again, I had moved after another 3 years, and this is not, I hadn't earmarked my calendar for every 3 years a move, it just worked out like that, to make a different decision, which was to actually take a demotion, to go down 2 levels, to chase a very specific role that I was particularly passionate about. And when we talk about making mistakes in your career, that was an excellent learning opportunity because for me at that point, that was probably not the best move that I made. It wasn't a great point in my career. It was about a year and a half where then I thought, no, I have to, make another move. But I had kind of sensed that even after 3 or 4 months, it wasn't the greatest of choices for me at that time. It was a great organization. It was just that the role and the fit for me wasn't right. So again, I moved and a couple of companies later, I'm here where I am now at Biogen, which is a company that I love. It's the longest time that I've spent at any organization, going on to 5 years now. And it's an organization that is extremely dynamic, and there's always something going on. You're pushing the boundaries of your job description, and it's an exciting role that I have. The other thing about my personal experience, which I believe has been greatly beneficial for me, is essentially looking at what is beyond the job. So yes, you have your job description and you work within an organization and you're working with it according to what your job description is. However, there will be opportunities and you have to be very proactive in your career. So there is the ethos that your own development is about 80% about your proactivity. So it's not, you can't leave it to others to develop you. You have to take charge of your own development. So for me, what that had meant is looking for opportunities for further education. So earlier in my career, I asked if I could get sponsored for another master's. I made that a postgraduate diploma in the end, and external courses, finding mentors, doing presentations related to my job role, but externally in trade associations and different forums and events. So these are all things that added new skill sets for me, soft skills and otherwise, which were really important for me. And it kind of feeds your motivation again, in terms of your career is just not made up of what you do in your daytime in terms of the job, but it's much more than that. So that's been a really important aspect of my career development. Next slide, please. In terms of career planning, so this sounds easier than what it really is to plan a career, because again, you don't always know where your career is going to go. Even now, if you ask me, do I know where I'm going to be in 5 to 10 years? The answer is probably not 100%, I do think you have to leave a little out there so that you're not so fixed in terms of where you want to be, because there are opportunities that just show up sometimes, and sometimes they're the best opportunities. But obviously, you're all doing your education at Westminster, whatever stage you're at. Either you will feel that once you've finished with Westminster, you've finished with education. But education is much more than just a postgraduate or an undergraduate degree. There's other types of education out there. And my advice is to consider that. Consider what education could mean for you in the future. Whether it's doing short courses, there are opportunities, and perhaps Westminster has that as well, where you can do 6-week courses on various different topics. Like recently I'd done one at another university around disruptive strategy. So that's a big concept in leadership. So education as a component is a really important aspect to consider, as in what is your continued education. Motivation. So again, it's hard to figure out what will motivate you right at the beginning of your career. Sometimes, and I'll cover this later on, sometimes you just need to start somewhere, and then you will find the aspects that motivate you. Either there are aspects, the technical aspects of the job that motivate you, or there are the other things related to the job that motivate you. So to give you an example, I work in a scientific field and I come from a scientific background, but I am not a scientist by definition. Right? What I do on a day-to-day basis is not related very, very close to the science. I must be aware of it. I must be able to understand the terminology. I must be able to talk to scientists. But what I do myself is not about the science necessarily directly. But what motivates me is the fact what I do has a direct influence on whether patients have access to life-changing medication. So that is my primary motivation, that I have the ability to influence the well-being of people globally in what I do. How I do that is related to the relationships that I make internally, the relationships I make externally, putting in and collaborating with stakeholders that are across my organization to do the right thing for the patient. So that's where my motivation is. And you have to look at motivation for yourself over the course of your career as your North Star, right? So your motivation will, what is the best thing that will drive the career choices that you make, the decisions that you make throughout the course of your career, and it will probably drive you to the areas that you will enjoy the most in your career. So a very important factor. Success is like, also, what do you define as success for yourself personally? Is it really about, some people will say that the financial aspect is success, so reaching the highest levels so that you can get the highest compensation, the highest salary is the measure of success, is the driver, could be bleeding into the motivation. You know, for some people, success is being recognized by your peers or your colleagues in your company, outside of the company, for doing a good job. Success is getting feedback from external people, whether it's patient advocacy or whether it's to do with healthcare professionals, saying that the value that the company gives is immense. You know I've played my role in that. So that could be success, but success is something really important for you to define. There's no right or wrong answer in success, in my opinion. It's really down to you, what suits you, because it's your career. Career ladder. So in my example, from my experience, I was very intent in terms of climbing a career ladder. I knew that fairly early on, that I wanted to progress through levels. I think talking about ethnic minority aspect or my background aspect, I always grew up in a family where, I don't know, maybe the extended family was just something to show off about, you know, that, oh, such and such person is this level, etc. So it was just a thing that was in my upbringing. So I don't know whether that had an influence. It probably certainly did. You know, to explain, my father has not had an education of any sort. He's a self-made businessman. My mother, complete opposite. She's a PhD in maths, but she never worked in the corporate environment. So built a career ladder. So I didn't have any family, direct family exposure as to what it is or how you actually climb a career ladder. But you have to define that for yourself. Is that what you want, is to climb a ladder? If it is, then that will also then influence your planning as to how you will do that. The other thing is defining your goals. You will have goals every year when you work in an organization. They are standard goals that you will talk with your manager, but then you will also have, outside of that, personal goals, your own personal development goals. So again, if you look at my career background, it was kind of early frequent moves in order for me to meet my personal goals of working in such and such area, to then going into people management, to then having bigger teams, to then working internationally, etc. These are the different type of goals. So that's another aspect. If you have the aspiration to work internationally, and I think the working environment for society, because in a post-pandemic era, is going to change, but it's always possible to work internationally. So if that's what drives you, then that's going to be part of your career planning at some point. Strengths and weaknesses. I'm a big proponent of this, in that it's very important to constantly assess what your strengths and your weaknesses are. I don't necessarily like the word weaknesses. Perhaps they're more development opportunities, because weaknesses do not need to stay forever. And strengths will always evolve and change. So it's really important to understand what those are, because then again, they could influence how you plan your career, the jobs that you take on, etc. So that's also important. Qualification, almost related to the education. In some fields, you may need certain types of qualification. So for obvious reason, you want to understand that. And really, the checklist just represents, all of these factors, drawing those all out, as much as you can. And again, the whole career planning process develops and evolves over time. This is not something that you're going to write down on a piece of paper and come back to it every year or every other year. It's not necessarily like that. If you do that, then you're very well organized. But this is something that, through the natural course of your career, you will start to think like this, and it will start to, you will reflect, and that will help manage your career and evolve your career over time. Next slide, please. So really, in terms of my personal experience, the fact that I went directly, I think it was within 3 months of completing my master's, straight into a role into pharmacovigilance, which is the field that I work in now. I won't go through exactly what that is. It was in part serendipity. It was a little bit of luck. It was the first role that I applied for. I got it. It was good timing for me. But at the end of the day, in retrospect, perhaps I should have done a little bit more planning to see what else was out there. Not that I do not enjoy what I do now, but I think me enjoying what I do now was an aspect of luck, because I didn't really know what the industry was about. And there are different ways that you can find out what is out there. I think your career starts now. So, what I mean by that is that you're at university, but there's things that you can do now, like attending some of these events that Westminster holds, that will help you to navigate as you look towards starting your career. So I think you can never start too early in terms of understanding where your career will go, or what the options are. And what it means to build a career is really important. A career is not built in a day. I sometimes get questions from folks that are starting their career that, hey, I would like a job in leadership. How do I get there? And, sometimes I feel that the expectation is that you get the leadership role within X number of years. I'm not saying that's not impossible, that's not possible, but it takes time to build a career. A career is something that you have to nurture. A career is something that you have to build over time very carefully. Much like a house, if you put the low quality bricks in there, then the chances are the career is going to not be built on the best foundations. So you really have to take time and care to build a career. You will have to make mistakes and learn from them, but that is the enjoyment of building a fruitful career. Next slide, please. So in terms of finding the right role, if I was to give you some advice, is that you have to, for sure, like I said before, you have to start somewhere. So for me, it was just taking an entry-level role, but be selective, be very careful in how you read job descriptions there, so that you can read between the lines and understand exactly what the expectations are. Remember, when you go into an interview process or you apply for a role, it's a two-way process. So, for me, when I had my first interview, it was almost like I'm just hoping that I answer all of their questions in a way that would essentially lead to me getting the role. I didn't really ask any questions of that employer when I look back. And it is a two-way process. I should have asked questions. And employers, they want you to do that. They want you to show an interest, ask questions. What is the company like? What is the culture like? What are the prospects? You can ask all sorts of questions that give you the information as to whether that is going to be the right job for you. Again, reading between the lines to understand exactly what is it that they are asking of the individual, the candidate, prospective candidate, when it comes to fulfilling the role obligations. Right. So these are important things that you have to look at. The other thing which is pointed to this research that I found is that often men will go for jobs when they only have 60% of the listed qualifications, but women will tend to only go for roles where they have 100% of qualifications. My advice is don't make that mistake. And in reality, you have to be somewhere in the middle. You do go for stretch roles, go for roles that ask for a little bit more than what you have. When you start your career, perhaps you're starting from the beginning where you may not have many of the tick boxes, but there are other things like soft skills and showing motivation and passion and personality that will help you get the role. And remember, most jobs are often created and shaped for the right candidate. So as someone that hires individuals all the time, for me, I see whether they can do whether they can do the job. If they can do the job from day one perfectly, hit the road running, that's fantastic. For me, the large part of it is the personality and what they offer beyond the role as well. And over time, I know that, it could be that we will develop this job even further because we have the right candidate. We have a candidate that can grow, that brings much more value. And then over time, we can shape the job for them. So a lot of jobs are created and shaped in this way. So just remember that. And the other thing, and I'm not necessarily going in order here, there is no particular order, but when you look at a job description and you identify that you don't have all of the things that whether they say it's preferable or required in the job, that doesn't necessarily have to deter you. You have to make sure you've got a very strong cover letter when you apply. If you understand what the gaps are in your experience compared to what the job description asks for, then attempt to bridge that gap. So, if it's preferable or required that X person has to have an X amount of knowledge in a certain area, and that person does not have the knowledge in that area, then maybe you can demonstrate that you have a high level of adaptability and a curiosity, that you are a quick learner. So that could be a way of bridging the gap. If employers can understand that an individual is able to bridge the gap for a piece of experience that they do not have, there is a high likelihood that they would still have a chance of being hired. So it shouldn't deter you. So that's my recommendation in terms of finding the right role. Next slide, please. In terms of the modern workplace, I didn't know where to put this slide, but I thought it's very relevant considering the environment that we have now and have had over the last 2 years. So pre-pandemic for me and over the years has been a lot of international travel. I have about 41 individuals reporting to me over 30 different countries. So by nature of my job, I need to travel all around the world. And on top of that, my accountability is for 110 countries around the world. So again, there's just a lot of interface with individuals all around the world where, because of time zone challenges, the best thing to do is always meet face to face. And it's, in the past, it's been a traditional office role in many industries. You clock in 9 to 5, 9 to 6:30, whatever your hours are, and you clock out. But I think a post-pandemic work practice and a workplace is going to change. I think, number one, what's exciting for all of you guys as you approach your careers is that there is a massive breadth in opportunity. So a lot of companies are recognizing now that if in the past they said a certain role had to be done in a certain country, well, not anymore, because all around the world it's been proven that people can work remotely where they are. Obviously, there's still time zone challenges which can still be circumvented in one way or the other. You can get around that, but the breadth of opportunity is huge, in my opinion. I think also there's a lot more trust in the workplace, again, because before it's contracted hours, but now it's about focusing on delivery. So, you know, in my contract, in my job role, you know, as it does in a lot of UK employment contracts, it will say a set number of hours, etc. But really, no one's counting, and really you are judged on delivery. What is the end results that you produce? So understanding that that is the workplace is really important. Collaboration. So again, a lot more time in an office space in the past. A lot of companies now are moving to a situation where there's a lot more work from home, or flexible working, they call it. Collaborating virtually, collaboration full stop is very important, but being able to collaborate virtually, come across over a screen, is also going to be a big change, and how we communicate with each other is also really important. So the danger is that what you don't want to do is, because you're working virtually and you can't meet face to face, people tend to slip into emails, but there is still the value of having a one-to-one conversation over the telephone or on a video conference. So that's really important. And good communication is really, really important. Like I mentioned, your email. So I'll give you an example. I tell most of my team that I prefer not to receive emails if it's something that we can deal with over a telephone call or a video conference. And the reason for that is, number one, it just takes me longer to get through all of the emails, so the response time is much lower. Number two, it's a much more personable experience to talk to someone one-to-one. So, you know, good communicators. Being a good communicator is a really important facet to success, in my opinion. Certainly in my case, it has been. There's some further reading that you can do here on the Harvard Business Review, which is a really good site to get different articles on various aspects. So they have 5 models for the post-pandemic workplace that you can look at. Next slide, please. So managing versus leading. So again, a lot of people think that it's the same, but it's not. It really isn't. And in my own experience, I was managing a long time before I was actually really leading. So I think I started managing people in close to 2010, or so 11 years ago. But I was only probably leading people in the last 7 years. So managing for 3 years and then going on to leading after, they're different aspects, and I'll explain that a little now. Next slide. So again, number one, you don't have to be a manager of people to be a leader. A lot of the times it may go hand in hand, but they're not exactly the same thing. You can have no direct reports. You don't have to have a team of people that report to you to be a leader in your organization. In fact, some of the best leaders that I've come across in my career have not been managers of people. So just to kind of explain broadly, though, managerial skills versus leadership skills, and the references are all here. So again, you can chase some of these references and read up about them a little bit more. But you know, in terms of management, if we just cover the right column first, or let's cover the left column first. So leadership. Leaders create and articulate vision and strategy. So you have the day-to-day operation of whatever is being done, but there is always a strategy and there's always a vision behind that. And mostly that will always come from the leadership team. So you'll hear terms like leadership team and management teams in the industries that you pursue in the future. And there is a difference in terms of their accountability. So a lot of the vision and strategy creation comes from the leadership teams and the leaders. So the leaders will welcome change and opportunity. So you may have heard of that saying that the only one constant in the world is change, right? That's the only thing that will keep on happening is change. So change is always an opportunity to refresh, to find better ways of doing things. And that's what's embraced by most leaders. They'll want that change. And they embrace accountability and transparency internally and externally. So against the leaders, if you look at the bottom right-hand image here, you know, the fact that the manager is directing the work to be done by the 5 individuals versus a leader who's actually showing how the work should be done ahead of the 5 individuals. To me, that's a great visual for how the differentiating a leader and a manager, being directive versus being a leader shown by example. So accountability comes through that, so that's a big aspect. Leaders excel at public relations, being open in their communications, sharing of information, articulation of the organizational vision. So again, it's connecting what you do on a day-to-day basis to the overarching strategy. And remember, strategies are not there just to work for a year. Strategies can be 5-year strategies, 10-year strategies. So the day-to-day operation has to link into that end goal that you have after the 5 or 10 years, which is a skill that is developed over time. Being able to always cast your mind to where you want to be in the end, rather than being absorbed into the day-to-day of what you're doing. So that bigger picture thinking is a really important facet of leadership. And leaders recognize risk as an opportunity. So, they always call it the risk and reward balance, right? So, a lot of the times the greatest reward comes from aspects of risk. And some of the risk it has to be, you have to make risk-based decisions in order to identify what the opportunities are and when you capitalize on those opportunities. In terms of management, if you look at it from the point of view, it's when I was managing, in my experience, when I was managing individuals, a lot of it was somebody's already written a playbook for me. And all I have to do is make sure my team fulfills against that playbook. That's how management felt like to me in the early stages of my career. So it was really putting things into practice, and it was focusing on the current systems. There was very little time, and I didn't have the skills at that time to really think about, well, okay, this is how it works today, or these are how the systems work today. But what if we changed the system? What if we changed how we did? Could we get an improvement in terms of how we do things, realize some efficiency? So again, that's where it comes from in leadership. Focus on doing and the achieving of budget and plans. I won't go too much into that. It's almost like there is a playbook in terms of your finances. When you're a manager, you have to do some financial planning, financial stewardship, they call it. And it's sticking to those budgets and plans. Whereas if you're a leader, you will draw the appropriate budget, you forecast for the appropriate budget to get to the goal where you want to be over the next X amount of years. So managers refer to these as communications for guidance. So again, in terms of being open in communications, a lot of the communications that may come from managers will be around guidance of the doing, whereas the leaders will share the vision as part of the communication. So it's not really about the doing, it's about the end vision. And the managers ensure risks are understood and controlled. So again, managers will, not necessarily look at risks as opportunities, but they'll try to control the risks. Whereas the leaders will try to use the risks as an opportunity to change. Now, in that comes a higher level of accountability, because if the risk doesn't work out, then you have to be accountable for it and learn from it. So there is a difference when we talk about the accountability. I won't go through the top right, which kind of really goes into a little bit more detail in terms of different things, but ultimately they cover the same aspects that the image on the left shows. Next slide, please. So here's, again, I kind of described to you, is that I started off as a manager, and then several years later, I felt like I was more of a leader later. So this is a reference that I've forgotten to put, but I'll add this in afterwards. But most new managers are not ready to lead at the time that they start in management. And so there are over 2 million people being promoted into management roles each year. And that's why training is critical. So firstly, when I talked about what beyond the job, what can you do? My advice is, if you are looking to go into leadership, always reinforce your learning with opportunities that can develop you as a leader. So whether it's external courses, a lot of companies will have internal courses and training that allow you to develop as a leader. And I'll talk about mentoring, because I think that's also really important. But continuing your learning experience into what leadership really means is really important. And on top of that, experience and time will arm you with more facilities to become a really good leader. Next slide, please. networking, relationships, and mentors. So it's one of the most important slides, in my opinion, when I think about my own career. Next slide, please. So here's my personal experience. I've done quite a few moves in terms of companies. So if you think about it, it's like 16 years of working experience, and I think I'm on my 5th or 6th company, which is quite a lot. To be honest, it's quite a lot. I feel I'm very settled now in what I do now, but I've made quite a few moves. And one thing I know is that you should never burn any bridges. It's every industry that you approach, it's a really small world. So you never know when that individual is going to be someone that you would want to leverage in the future as a colleague, manager, as a report, and it's really important that you never burn bridges. In terms of my own attitude to building a network, so I've always tried to build an internal network. So within the organization, if you look at it as layers, so you have your team, your immediate team, then you have your department, then you have your broader organization, and then you have outside of your organization. So another 2 layers could be within your industry still, but outside of your organization. And then you have partnerships or trade associations. So those that are not directly in your industry, but influence your industry. So each layer has an opportunity for you to network. And networking is really important. And so, it's an avenue for new opportunities, which is a big thing for careers. Like the last 3 or 4 roles that I've taken at different companies have been because I've had a reference. Someone has referred me from a previous organization that we've worked at together. So they're an avenue for new opportunity. As many as 80% of jobs are not landed by applying online, but through personal and professional connections. And 70% of jobs are not publicly listed. A lot of organizations that I've worked for in the past, they have even higher rates by which they recruit from internal. So that means there's a lot of networking that goes internally that says, well, here's an individual that is in this team, but we think that they are developing really well and they could do a job in another team. And a lot of that happens. So building a network is really important. And I'll talk about profiling and personal branding, which goes hand in hand with that. Your network may be the key to your next career move. Your chances of landing a job increase tenfold with a right employee referral. So again, those referrals could come from your network. It's an avenue to exchange ideas. So to give you an example, what I do today, so I've gathered 6 or 7 individuals from other organizations, some of them which I've worked at before, that do the same job as me, but in their organizations. And so I've created a network whereby we can exchange ideas on like challenges and challenges that we commonly face within our individual organizations, to see how we can cross-pollinate and cross-benefit what we do on a day-to-day basis. And it's surprising because you'll meet people in your network and you may think you know a great deal about a certain topic, but you really don't know how much you know until you listen to others. And that really helps you to develop as a professional, as an individual in your career. So again, it's very useful. It makes you more noticeable inside and outside of your company. So, I do a fair bit on LinkedIn. Again, I'll cover that. And for me, it's really important because, I don't want to be a servant only within my one organization that I work for. Essentially, we all do the same thing in my industry, which is to serve the patients worldwide, right? So essentially, my goal is to contribute to the whole industry wherever I can, and also to receive contributions from elsewhere within the industry. So again, doing that, I think helps me, it gives me some sort of self-fulfillment, I would say, but it does make you more noticeable as you progress your career as well. You show an interest outside, and that a lot of times if an individual who notices that you're sharing an interest beyond your immediate role, they'll remember that if they're a recruiter, if they're a hiring manager and you're in front of them in the future. So very important. As you develop relationships with those in your department and in other divisions, it's also really helpful in identifying potential mentors. So we'll talk about mentors next, and that will make more sense. Next slide, please. So value of a supportive network to your career, so new jobs of interest. It allows you to vet the companies and cultures, connect with people already working at your ideal organization or in your desired field, open you to greater possibilities than you originally thought were possible, present yourself in a more confident and compelling manner. So these are all reasons why network is very important. Next slide, please. And in terms of being an effective network, I think that was one of the questions. So there's no one size that fits all. When I started in the career, I was very much an introvert. I kind of adapted over time. So introverts may prefer more of a one-to-one way of networking, having a coffee with an individual they've identified as being someone great to network with. And some folks more extrovert would like to go to an event where there's loads of people and they can just go from an individual to an individual and connect with them, make a network. So different, there's no one size that fits all. You can search for the right events and organizations that matter to you. So you should have a goal, some sort of idea of an area that motivates you, and then use that to find the right places to go and meet people. Meeting new people that align with your personal or professional interests is a really important anchor as well. Volunteering is a great way to build networks and also experience and soft skills. So in the past, I've taken trustee roles, so working with local council on various different aspects and advising the strategy. So that's been a great way to network with individuals and learn different skills. Head into each networking opportunity with a goal. So for example, if I went to a networking event in my career, in my mind, I wouldn't necessarily write this down, but in my mind, it would be like, well, I want to meet a few people from X company or this trade association, or just generally I want to meet 3 new people in my industry, connect with them, and then maybe there's a way to kind of maintain a professional relationship. Make sure you follow up with people in your network. So it's not enough just to exchange numbers and contact details and LinkedIn profiles. You should maintain a relationship somehow. And you can do that through aspects of your work or otherwise, but maintaining a relationship is important. Being a connector. One way that you can add value to the people that you connect with, because the thing is that people find value in you, as a network, if you're able to connect them with other individuals that might be of service to them as well. So being a connector is a really important aspect of networking and maintaining an effective profile. Next slide, please. So in terms of LinkedIn, so when I started in industry, LinkedIn I don't think was around at that time, at least I didn't really use it. I've only really started to use it in the last few years. But there's some interesting facts out there about LinkedIn. All of this is from another site, which I'll put the reference down. But it's the 24th most visited website worldwide. It's got 738 million users. 80% of LinkedIn members drive business decisions, like hiring decisions. So that's quite a huge amount of potential recruiters out there, or hiring managers out there. More than 176 million from the US on LinkedIn. The US is significant because for a lot of industries and companies, US is like a central hub for them. Many headquarters are based in the US. So that gives you an idea of the significance. Job seekers with a comprehensive LinkedIn profile have a 71% higher chance of getting a job interview. I've seen individuals that had a LinkedIn profile, but it's very bare. It's not, that won't be good enough. And in fact, it might have the opposite effect if you don't really build something to your LinkedIn profile. And I know individuals that are just haven't started their career yet, or about to start a career, there are ways that you can build a profile, even based on your academics and things that you've done outside of a job placement. And there's lots of information online on how to do that. So just to show you, LinkedIn profile statistics also reveal that those with bare bones profiles receive even fewer callbacks than applicants without LinkedIn in the first place. So again, it's very important that you use these opportunities very carefully, very deliberately. The number of remote job postings on LinkedIn increased 6 times during the pandemic. Approximately 3 people get hired every minute on LinkedIn. So it's a major recruiting site now as well. You can apply to jobs directly through LinkedIn. Next slide, please. In terms of mentoring versus coaches, so one of the most important things that I've had in my career is always had a good mentor. Throughout my career, I've always had good mentors. But there is a difference between I've had coaches as well, but there is a difference between a mentor and a coach. So a mentor is someone that's an experienced colleague, someone who's maybe quite a few years ahead of you in their career, and they share their greater knowledge to support the development of you as a more inexperienced colleague. It calls on the skills of questioning and listening and clarifying and reframing. So a mentor is not just about giving answers. It really, there is a very particular skill in being a mentor. It's almost like you have to do a lot of the listening and helping to just ask questions that helps the individual to think and clarify and, look at the situation from a different perspective. So that's reframing in order to help them navigate whatever they would like to navigate. Longer term, then coaching arrangements. So I've had mentors for during the course of my entire career. Like one of the first managers that I had 14 years ago I would still consider her my mentor, right? I've had mentors for 6 months only because I thought, well, at the beginning, I thought they would be a great mentor, and they are a fantastic mentor for someone, but maybe where I am, I've got everything that I needed from them, they've got everything they needed from me, and it's time to move on to another mentor. So, but generally they are longer term in arrangement. They move beyond the approach of a senior colleague just telling it how it is to one where it's more of a mutual learning experience. So it's effective. I mean, I've mentored as well, and I still mentor myself, and I find it extremely rewarding for myself as well. So I'm always learning something new as well from the mentees. Effective mentoring relationship is a learning opportunity for both participants. So pretty much reiterating the point above. In terms of coaching, it's different in that it's a non-directive form of development. It focuses on proving a very specific part of their performance, their actual job. So whereas a mentor may not be very close to the details of your actual job, it could be more about the broader sense of your career. So whereas a coach is more to do with the specific aspects of your job. Coaching activities are both organizational and individual goals. So the coach may be armed with the intent of improving efficiencies, so thus the coaching. And the individual goal may be, well, the individual needs to be coached so that they also improve performance or whatever. So it's usually linked to that. Whereas mentoring, it's usually a development opportunity for the individual and the mentor. It's not always that it's in a more indirect way will the organization benefit, I feel, a lot of the time. I've also had mentors inside of the company and outside of the company. I should mention that while I've been at a role. Opportunities to better assess strengths and development areas. So it directly feeds the formalized development plan that the organization will build for the individual. And it's usually in around a skilled activity delivered by people who are trained to do that activity. So that's why a lot of the times the line managers of teams will be trained in coaching skills, because that is a part of their role. So, I mean, good mentors and coaches know the difference between the two, and you will feel that in the relationship. But I can't understate this. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you: as soon as you enter a job place, find a mentor and constantly look at what you want from the mentor. Make sure you're very clear with the mentor what you want from the relationship, and change your mentors every so often as it suits your career. But it has a massive influence on your own development as you progress. Next slide, please. Can I get a time check on this, David?
Yeah, we're fine. The event's scheduled to end about 8, so we might have a shorter Q&A, but you're fine to go on now.
No, thank you, David. All right, so 10 qualities of a great manager. So someone who challenges you, so always pushes you to be better and never lets you rest on your laurels, is experienced. I think the experienced bit, so the thing is, you could be inexperienced even in your career and be a fantastic coach. Generally, the mentors that I've had are very experienced individuals. So they've been through a lot of the maybe typical challenges that you might have in a workplace. and so are able to guide. And a lot of the times the conversations I've had around mentors is nothing to do with the technical aspect of my job. It's all about navigating or soft skills or the broader aspect of working in a corporate environment. Is where you want to be. So the mentor is usually someone, if you cast your mind 10 years from now, maybe they're already there. So it helps you with your own pathway for development, supports you. So again, like I said, you have to make mistakes in your career. You have to have moments of challenge in your career to really to really test you and develop you. And they're an excellent facility to help support you as you go through those challenges. They're a fantastic listener. Like I say, most of the time you'll turn up to a mentoring session and you may come out of it feeling like you've done all the talking, but that is the whole point. Is available. So someone that you've got access to, good access. What you don't want is a mentor where they can't commit to the relationship. So you have one session and your second session will be a year and a half later. You don't want that. So it's important up front to kind of agree a frequency. So they're invested in your success. So most people that mentor are always invested in the success of the people that they mentor, the mentees. And the reason for that is because mentoring, a lot of the times, you don't receive any other reward for it apart from fulfillment. So a lot of the time, of course you want the individual, of course you want to provide them with help and support that leads to their success. And yeah, even the potential to surpass themselves is fantastic. And I've had that in the past. I've had mentors that have been fantastic in that way and really just care about success. Guide you towards the answer, but doesn't give you the answers. That's the key. It's about asking more questions rather than providing answers. So it helps you to think for yourself, provides constructive feedback. Throughout your career, you will need constructive feedback. It's all good and well getting the positive feedback of what's going really well and how you're progressing, and you will get that for sure. That's important. But providing constructive feedback is the difference in that. That helps you how to develop. Respects you, never looks down on you. This is not some sort of subordinate relationship. So instead they see you as an equal, but maybe just someone that's 10 years prior to where they are, but definitely an equal. It's not a hierarchical relationship. Next slide, please. So the value of good mentors, build your network. So they can also direct you to individuals that you should connect with to help build your career once they understand your pathway. They'll broaden your perspective because they'll share their experiences. They'll lay out your goals with someone else. Laying out your goals with someone else will add an aspect of accountability. So in the end, if you're telling another individual apart from your manager about what your goals are, and they're talking you through it, it kind of adds a little bit of ownership to, okay, now that I've laid these goals out, I really want to progress towards them. So the accountability aspect is really important. Mentors on your side and will be there to provide support. They can offer advice and speak on past mistakes that they've made. Like I said, every individual who's had a fruitful career will have made mistakes at some point, and they've learned from them. That's the value of it. Mentors help you to keep focused on the important aspects at hand. So this is a really important point because I think some things will happen in your career, and the risk is you over ponder on potentially negative aspects. And what mentors can do is just reframe things as learning opportunities. And it will make you reframe it so that you focus on that really important bigger picture aspects. So it's really important. It's a really useful support system that they provide in that way. Next slide, please. So workplace diversity, personal branding and anchors. So throughout this, like I said at the beginning, it's been very difficult. It's been challenging to kind of link in, number one, trying to give you guys an insight as to all of the different aspects that can help you in your career if you're following a path to leadership. Even if you're not following a path towards leadership, they're still very useful to develop your career. But then tying it into being someone from my situation, an ethnic minority, I'll be honest with you, in complete transparency, I have never felt directly that my ethnicity has limited me in any way. But maybe that's because, like, for example, I grew up in Hounslow. It was majority Asian community. but I had to go to school in another area where it was Asian minority. So I guess adaptability and relating and empathy with individuals of other backgrounds has been something that I've just learned over time, or absorbed over time. So in the reverse, entering the workplace, I never felt that my ethnicity was put me at a disadvantage in any way, or anything was withheld because of my ethnicity. I can never know for sure 100%, but I don't believe it is. But I can give you a commentary on where I feel, certainly we all know what's happening in society around diversity, but where the workplace is going on this aspect. And for me, what I do consider is that my cultural background, just like any individual should consider their background, they bring something unique, whether they're from an ethnic minority or not. If they're coming from a background of any sort, that they will provide something unique to the workplace. And this is exactly what employers want these days. Next slide, please. So in terms of my experience, the honest answer, I've mentioned it, never really felt like that. But growing up, I was used to adapting in different communities. In the workplace, I did feel at the beginning of my career, I had to adapt my profile or the way that I communicated, just so I could maybe fit in. Over time, I've become more confident, more assured of what I offer and value, so I don't need to compromise on anything else in terms of my profile or the way that I interact with people. Lessons from relating and empathy. So a big reason why I do what I do today, which is working internationally and having a team of folks around the world, is because I love the diversity. I love the fact that one day I can talk to someone in Spain who's a different culture, to someone in India, to China, to Japan. And I love the variation that brings, because I think it's the diversity that brings a lot of color to our industry, in terms of working together. And again, I'll show you all of the benefits that research has shown around diversity, which hopefully gives you a lot of positivity, whether you come from an ethnic background or not, whether you come from a diversity background or not. That gives you a lot of confidence in the workplace going forward. Harnessing and appreciating who I am. So even though at the beginning of my career I was an introvert, I am direct in nature, but I know that I always come from positive intent. So because of that, I'm very confident in myself in terms of how I interact with people. But this is this is something that you developed over time. So it's not something, like I say, you build a career, you learn things over time and you get the confidence. But I've grown to appreciate that. So how it has influenced and motivates me to do the job that I do today. So explaining that, really, I very deliberately picked the job that I do today and working with multiple countries. I could focus in one particular area, which doesn't give me that exposure as much, but I've chosen to do the job that I do because of my background of being exposed to different cultural communities. So for me, that's really important in what I do. I think the other thing, there is a war on talent out there. So more employers are realizing that strong talent, strong diverse talent, it's a really competitive space. And so attracting the right people and diverse set of talent is really, really important. And retaining them is equally important, because it costs the industry a lot of money to deal with turnover of staff. So, it's a really, for talent out there, it's a really, really promising time. So and I'll talk about the war on talent. Society and the workplace is changing as well. So, from an HR perspective, companies are doing more and more to educate their organization, their leaders, their hiring managers on the importance of diversity. And so we'll cover some in the next slides. Next slide, please. So I've stolen this from Hitachi, but it's an excellent slide. And essentially it just talks about, how gender diverse companies are more likely to outperform their peers. It has a greater impact on business performance when you have a diverse background. So 2.5 times in some cases higher cash flow. generally, if you've got diverse teams that are of different generations, then they're 10% happier as a team than those that are not as diverse in terms of generations. In terms of the recruitment strategy, a lot of companies focus on ethnicity and different nationalities as part of their diversity and inclusion programs. And 2/3 of people consider workplace diversity to be a major factor for choosing where to work. And again, it's a war on talent for companies. So, companies want to stand out as organizations that encourage diversity because they understand the advantages that it brings. Staying ahead of the game, so companies are working to promote diversity and inclusion. 55% of companies have policies which promote diversity. I guarantee you that it's much higher now, much higher, strongly or very strongly. Next slide, please. So I won't go through all of the benefits here, but a lot of them that we've talked about. So, greater innovations, increased profits, better decision making, reduced turnover, reputation. Again, diversity is really, really important. For me, it's been a personal passion for mine over the last few years to kind of do whatever I can in my bit to kind of promote more and more diversity. So I'll give you an example of what I've done is that we looked at our job descriptions for when we hire individuals in my team, and we found out we had all sorts of strange wording. And in organizations, a lot of the time what happens is that you have a job description for a role that's been around for 15 years, and the job description has hardly been changed. It's just been inherited over and over, and you kind of repost it, get a candidate in and move on. But we looked at the job descriptions because we wanted a wider candidate, more diverse candidate pool. So we started to take out some words which introduced unconscious bias, they call it. So unconscious bias is either wording or aspects of requirements of the job description that may eliminate potential talent. So we started to really strip it down to the absolutely bare essentials to get a good candidate pool in, a diverse candidate. We found that it was a big impact to how we employed a more diverse workforce. Next slide, please. So personal branding is really, really important. So I was at a company many years ago, and I had my boss's boss ask me, Rishi, what's your personal brand? I had no clue what he was talking about. So I found this quote from Jeff Bezos, who's the founder of Amazon. Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So I thought that's a nice way of articulating it. It's a unique combination of skills and experiences that make you who you are. And I think those experiences are not only professional, they also could be personal. So it's also how you present yourself to the world. And effective personal branding, this is why it's so important, will differentiate you from the competition in terms of other candidates for a role or a promotion, etc. And it allows you to build trust with prospective employers. So, to give you an idea and to tie this back to why I think LinkedIn, is just the way things are in terms of building a community, a professional community, is continuous brand management is really important. 70% of employers use social media to screen candidates during the hiring process, and 43% of employers use social media to check on current employees. So your career and experiences will help you develop, and evolve your personal brand to the point that it becomes an absolute linchpin for your success as a leader. So just to kind of bring this back to personally what I developed over time. So again, tying this into mentors, and hopefully I'm giving you the idea that all of the concepts that I've discussed about, they all overlap in some way. I've got a benefit from each aspect. So one of the benefits, I had a mentor, and it was at the same company where the individual asked me, well, what's your brand? Had no clue. He asked me to go away and think about it. So I asked my mentor, and I said, look, I've been asked to think about what my brand is. So I asked her what her brand was. And she said, well, worked in a corporate environment for many years, and as a woman, and she was coming towards the end of her career, close to retirement. And so times were very different when she started. And again, she had to talk from the perspective of perhaps, maybe not changing who she was, but, filtering who she was, true to herself. And eventually what she said was her anchor was authenticity. She said that she wanted, after a while, she just wanted to be known for being an individual that was always honest, that was clear, that nobody would question whether she had an agenda, that was very authentic in that everything she did came from a good place. And so that was really her brand, her linchpin, her anchor. And so, like, for me, I feel that my brand is a unique set of personal and professional experiences that allow me to effectively manage a diverse and international team, which brings me back to why I do the job that I do. I feel that's what I'm best suited to do at this time. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide, and sorry we haven't had as much time for questions, but again, my LinkedIn profile will be shared and I'll handle questions offline as well. But a career is built over time, so I really do mean this. And at the beginning of a career, you can be really ambitious and want to get as high, if the ladder is what you want to climb, as high as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. But sometimes taking the time to squeeze all knowledge and experience out of a certain role is more beneficial than moving quickly. Like I said, I've made certain miscalculations in my career where I've made a move where the grass wasn't always greener on the other side. So career is built over time, and being careful with it. It requires care and reflection. Every now and then, just think back about what your experience has been. Is it feeding your motivation? Do you need a move? Do you need to think about a different role altogether? So it requires reflection. And that's easier said than done. You know, people have very, very busy jobs. It goes from one day to another. And then you think, well, where's the time gone? And if you eventually, when you have families, etc., or you've got other commitments, there's even less time. And so having the opportunity to reflect on what's worked and what's not worked is a really important aspect. It's a small world. Don't burn bridges. So, like I say, treat every interaction as if it's your first and you're trying to make an impression. Be positive. Diversity is not a plus. So we shouldn't consider that diversity is a plus. It's an absolute must for successful organizations. So, you know, I reflect again whether being from an ethnic minority has ever limited me. I've never thought like that at all. And I don't know 100% for sure if it ever has, because of course there's been jobs that I've gone for that I've not got, but I've never thought I did not get those jobs because of my ethnic minority rather than the gaps in my career. But it's an absolute plus. It's an absolute must for organizations now. So it's a fantastic workplace, I think, for the future. Discover your brand as you progress in your career. Use it as your strength, as your anchor. Follow what motivates you. So, you know, for me, the biggest, one of the biggest things is that I do what I enjoy. You know, so you'll get the most satisfaction out of your career if you feel like that on a day-to-day basis. Positive intent in every interaction I've mentioned. Curiosity, ask questions, find out about other departments that you don't necessarily work in, but you think there might be a potential interest. Make the connections that will help you to direct yourself to areas that you might love the most in your career. And all good leaders recognize they never stop learning. So for sure, I'm nowhere, you know, through with my career. And even people that are much more senior than I am will say that they've never stopped learning. You learn it on a daily basis, but that's the beauty of building a really fruitful career. So I'll stop there, and, you know, thanks again for your time today, and I hope some of this has been useful to you.
Thank you so much, Rishi, for your presentation. The excellent insight that you've given us to your leadership journey, and for sharing those reflections with all of us here today. Now we have a tiny bit of time for some questions, which we've been collating during the talk. The excellent team have put together some of the questions into sort of subject areas. So I'm going to try and get through as many as possible. And we'll try and dip into some of the different areas as well. So firstly, a question on career journey from Pakwezi, which is, what's the best way to create a plan when you know your goal, but not the route in industry to get there?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So I'll give you an example. There is another organization because I do a lot with diversity called Black Pharma. And that is a type of organization that promotes education in potential areas for those that might have an interest. And so these are called career clinics. So my advice would be is to look up the potential for career clinics out there. Again, LinkedIn is a great resource for finding career clinics in potential areas and reaching out and finding out what opportunities are, what potential jobs are.
Great, thank you so much for that. Next question, we've got this one on networking. I think it's a great question, this one. It's from Danielle. Networking, how do we practically do it virtually?
Yeah, really good question. So I can tell you that the world and technology is changing. So even now we're doing things virtually. This is a form of networking as well. You have my connections now, so you can virtually connect with me through LinkedIn. But I attend a lot of conferences and I present at conferences, and virtually there are always breakout rooms for networking. So I think the way that certain organizations and event facilitators are organizing their events, they're allowing for virtual networking sessions. But you have to find other ways as well. And maybe, again, you know, I use LinkedIn a lot for networking. So I connect with individuals that I think are either in my industry or peers or people that I would like to talk to. And I do it in that way. You'll never beat a face-to-face interaction. I will say that for sure. When it comes to networking, tone and body language and, you know, all of those things that are important parts of communication. But I think technology is adapting, so it allows for networking in a way that at least would still be valuable. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. So we've got a question on challenges. This one's from Alexander. What are some of the challenges you faced post-graduation in your ascension to senior leadership roles, and how were you able to overcome them?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So at the beginning of my career, I don't think I took knockbacks very well. So whether it was applying for a job and I didn't get it, or whether it was going for a promotion and I didn't get it, I didn't really take it very well. In the way that I would be very disappointed and probably ponder on it too much. And I think you have to look at every experience and try to find the positivity in it. What is the nugget of positivity that you can take? So a lot of the times I started to shift, and this is again through mentoring and having good people around me as a support network, is understanding that for every knockback, there was a learning opportunity and how I could basically inform what my development area would be. And I would chase that. And I chased that development area, fill the gap, and then it allowed me to get a job, you know, in that same ambition. So, you know, I think it's realizing that every time that you get a challenge, there is an opportunity to learn and develop. So never take anything personal. I don't think it is these days, but just take it as a learning opportunity and find an angle.
So it's a really, really important reflection to find that positivity. Thank you for sharing that one with us. So we've got one from Kamala, asking a bit more about the diversity and your journey through being perceived as an ethnic minority or not, as the case may be. So Kamala's question is, can you say a little more on how you've had to adapt your profile to fit in?
Yeah, so, and really, again, I say authenticity, but so I'm a Hounslow boy. So I grew up in Hounslow, and I grew up in an environment where, again, everybody was Asian. A lot of their parents, it was the first time, you know, that's their first generation in the country, and parents may not have spoken English, right? My parents were not necessarily in that bracket, but those are the friends that I had around me. I didn't have a very, at the beginning in primary school, I didn't have a lot of diverse social network. That changed once I got to secondary school. When I got into the workplace, the way that I talk, the way that I don't know, express myself or everything or anything like that, I think I did try to adapt that really early on. Like I said, I'm quite direct in nature in the workplace. So very early on, I had to kind of just, you know, close my mouth sometime and just listen. And I think, you know, so whether it's to do with my ethnicity or my cultural background, I think over time I got a comfort level with being just who I am. So I didn't try to filter it too much anymore. Again, I think it's embracing the fact that your own diversity, your own uniqueness adds value to the workplace. Once you understand that, then you're not gonna feel limited in any way. And in fact, there's many reasons why you shouldn't need to adapt.
Excellent. Thank you again for your reflections on that one. We've got time for one more, I think. So we've got a question here from Sarah or Sarah. My apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly, Sarah. What are the pros and cons of having pharmacov as a career?
Pharmacovigilance as a career. So it's a pro and a con. It's a really niche area that I work in, very niche. The other pro is that it is directly related to saving patients' lives and making sure that we have medicinal products that treat really important diseases out there. So I currently work in the neurology, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's area. Spinal muscular dystrophy, and atrophy, so all of that area. So these are very difficult diseases to treat. So just the self-fulfillment, like satisfaction that you're actually making a benefit to people's welfare worldwide is really important. The cons is that at some point, read up about it, Myers-Briggs Profiles. So there's the Myers-Briggs Profiling basically explains the type of individual personality or comfort level that you have in terms of your personality. So whether you are red, yellow, blue, or green, introverted or extroverted. So by nature, I'm an extroverted. I started out as an introvert, but I shifted into an extrovert. But I work with a lot of introverts around me, a lot of people in the same Myers-Briggs category. So when you work in a niche area, sometimes just having to adapt personality traits in that way, it can be a challenge. But I don't know too many cons but I may be biased because I love what I do. Yeah.
That's a great question and a great answer as well. Thanks for that. Okay, should we try and squeeze one more in? So
here you need me, so whatever works for people. Yeah.
Okay, let's go with one more, which is, from your experience, what does diversity in leadership look like in your industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So at the beginning of my career, I did not see many senior leaders that looked or were just like me. So that's the strapline that I used on LinkedIn, and very true. So I didn't see many Asian or Indian or ethnic minority leaders at that time, and I think it's changed now a great deal. And the organization that I work for, like, my boss is an Asian woman, my boss's boss is an Asian woman, and then on our senior leadership team, our executive C-suite leadership team is extremely diverse: women, men, different ethnic backgrounds, different backgrounds, full stop. It's an extremely diverse team. So I think it's changing a huge amount, and that's just not my company. I've seen that in other companies in the same industry that I have. But I'm a firm believer, based on what's happening in society, full stop, it's almost like there's been another step in an awakening, if you like, with the Black Lives Matter movement, which greatly support, as well as everything else. There is a massive focus on diversity. So diversity is not a checkbox anymore for any company. In my opinion, now it's more of a recognition that unless you have a diverse workforce, you're not going to be successful. And that's because, like I put in the slides, the stats show that those organizations that are the most successful are successful because of the diversity that they have.
Thank you so much. So we have hit 8:05, and that's all we have time for right now. Rishi has really kindly given us so much of his time. Thank you for your insights. Apologies if there was a couple of the questions that didn't quite get through there today. Please can we ask all of our amazing Westminster students and alumni who've come with these brilliant questions, please can we ask you to fill in the short evaluation survey that's going to be put in the chat box right now. Highlights from this event will be found on the Alumni YouTube channel in the coming weeks, once we've had a chance to edit it all. And please join us for the next What It Takes event, which will be what it takes to turn virtual networks into opportunities. This one will be on Thursday, the 4th of November, and more information and booking details can be found on the What It Takes pages of the website. So can I ask you all again to give a massive thank you to Rishi. This has been an excellent event. I'm sure we've all really appreciated. So,
thanks. Yeah. If any of you want to reach out on LinkedIn, if there's any questions we missed and you want to ask it through LinkedIn, feel free to do so, and I'll try and get back to them as soon as possible for sure. But thank you for the opportunity to reflect as well. It's been very useful for me. So thank you so much, and good luck to all of you.
Great. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.